Hello, my dear students. Today we'll discuss a new topic on colonialism in South Asia. I hope you have already gone through my previous two lecture on imperialism in South Asia and the first one on strategic significance of South Asia. Today I'll deliver another lecture on colonialism in South Asia. In this particular lecture, I'd like to deliberately highlight how the modern imperialist forces which came to this part of the world, means to this South Asia, in different historical circumstances, and how they became successful in establishing colonies in South Asian context. Since the very long before if we're talking about this modern imperialist version or modern imperialism, the very idea of modern imperialism, it basically came into existence in the context of South Asia, specifically from 18th centuries onwards. But prior to that, long before this 18th century, you know, particularly from 10th, 11th centuries onwards, in different historical circumstances, different emperors came to this part of the world in terms of establishing their empire. In the earlier lecture, I have already discussed about the various aspects of different empires, how different sorts of empires established in this part of the world. Specifically, I've already told you about these Mughal empires, about these Mauryan empires. But those were the empires who established their empire in this part of the world. In terms of the nature of their establishment of empire was something different in comparison to this modern version of this imperialisms. And from this modern version of imperialism, subsequently this they developed that particular ideas of colonialism. The very idea of colonialism also developed from this modern version of imperialism. These both concept of imperialism and colonialism to some extent is related with each others. The South Asia, which is considered to be the full of treasures of nature, the availabilities of pearls, diamonds, perfumes, rose essence, elephants, lions, it's a treasures of different reserves, treasures of natures. It's a scenic beauties, the natural resources, the minerals, and also can be considered as the treasure of wisdom as well. So as a result of this availabilities of different sorts of resources, it attracted the foreigners, it attracted the outsiders to intervene to this part of the world. And subsequently history shows us how different foreigners, different outsiders invaded to this part of the world. Some foreigners, some outsiders came to this part of the world in the purpose of looting something, in the purpose of extracting something. So for example, we have the finest example of this intervention by this Muhammad Ghazni. He intervened to this part of the world only in the purpose of extracting the wealth from this part of the world. We have some other examples as well, but at the same time We have some another sorts of empires who intervene in this part of the world. Say for example, Mughal Empire. They established their empire not only in the purpose of extracting the profit, but also they tries to establish the society, the cultural society. They try to stabilize the social system, administrative systems. So their empires were something different in comparison to the modern version of this imperialism, which subsequently results in the form of colonialisms. For example, we have the modern version of imperialist forces like this British colonialisms, the France colonialisms. These are the version of this modern imperialism, and they became successful in establishing colonies in this part of the world. I'd like to start my discussions with a particular quotations. Since my whole analysis specifically concentrated in South Asian context and more specifically Indian subcontinent, so it carries a lot of relevance. It says that सारे जहां से अच्छा ये हिंदुस्तान हमारा हम बुलबुले हैं सिके ये गुलसिता हमारा, means better than the whole world is our Hindustan. We are its singing birds. It is our garden of delights. It is expressed by Muhammad Iqbal. Later on, these particular persons became the supreme, one of the pivotals in terms of demanding, the very idea of Pakistan's along with this Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So subsequently, down the line, in the context of South Asia, these small issues creates some effects, both positive and negative effect, in a better development of this particular society, and subsequently, from the ancient time, the people in this part of the world, which basically establish their cultural pluralism, their cultural dominance, cultural acceptabilities, social stabilities in this part of the world. Subsequently, slowly and gradually, they diluted, they get alienated from each others. Not only as a result of these differences among them, but also the seeds of separatism that has been injected by this colonial masters in the mind of this the common people, the innocent people, they reside in the South Asian regions, which are peace, and subsequently slowly and gradually this South Asia become a kind of a boiling hotspot. The modern historians specifically, they call the period from the late 19th centuries to the middle of the 20th century as the age of modern imperialisms. That means the late 19th century, that means this most probably this 1850s onwards to the middle of 20th centuries, that may be probably this 1950s. So more specifically, according to the modern historians, from 1850s to this 1850s to this 1950s. Okay, this is considered to be the age of modern imperialisms. But prior to that, if we're talking about in the Indian context, in the Indian subcontinent context, we are under the scars of these colonial masters from 1757 to 1947. So it's a around 190 years we were under this colonial masters. But nevertheless, the modern version of imperialism, if you're talking about the modern version of imperialism, it's basically talking about this particular period from the late 19th centuries to the middle of 20th centuries. And this particular term imperialism was first coined by Benjamin Disraeli in 1872 in the context of the British general election of 1874. the concept, the terminologies, this colonialism, this colonizers, these imperialisms, these are nothing but some sort of, conceptual development that develop as a result of academic discourse analysis. This is a part of discourse analysis. So likewise, this term imperialism was also coined by Benjamin Disraeli in 1872 in the context of the British general elections of 1884. And more accurately, this particular age could be called the age of colonial empires. This age of modern imperialism, which also can be considered as the age of colonial empires. In the second half of the 19th century, this Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels for the first time used the word colonialisms. And Hobson was the first to pick up the term imperialism for criticism from the economic angle. So from this middle of 19th centuries onwards, this debate, this different sorts of debates, this different sorts of critical articulation in terms of modern version of imperialism, in terms of colonialisms, they got started. That means there's a kind of academic discourse analysis also developed among the critics, among these academicians, among these intellectuals, among these social scientists. About this the development of social science, the development of the society, the development of world politics, specifically from 19th centuries onwards. In a pure sense, colonialism is a demographic concept that signifying the presence of a population in a foreign country. Of course, when a population lives in a country other than its own original country, on terms of the local population, they are usually called aliens or immigrants or minorities. It's only when the foreign population dominates the local population in terms of number of power or both, they're usually called colonizers. So the very concept of this colonialism can be practiced in the context of South Asia, more specifically from the middle of 19th centuries, when these colonizers become politically dominant in this part of the world. If you're talking about in the context of Indian subcontinent, these colonizers become more dominant, more specifically after this, this battle of Buxar and this battle of Plassey. Other than in this Indian subcontinent, they control the rest of the South Asian regions in the 19th century. So from 19th century onwards, this entire South Asia came under this, specifically under British colonialism. Now, this growth of modern colonialisms. By the middle of 19th century, that I have already told you, this middle of 19th century, the United Kingdom that emerged the biggest colonial empire of the world, and British Crown took over the administration of India in 1858. The East India Company. Soon it granted local autonomy to her white colonies, while her financial grip over their economies remained more or less intact. Netherlands and France had colonial possession in Southeast Asian Africa. Even the new state of Belgium acquired a colony of Africa's Congo. Immense rivalry for colonial possession in Africa broke out in the last quarter of the 19th century when Germany joined the race. And that subsequently led to the development of this war, this world war, first and second, the 20th centuries that we all know. But the series of development that took place in the 19th centuries, how this Western economic dominant forces become rival to each others, that we have already discussed in my previous lecture in imperialism in South Asia. How these imperial forces, develop their hostilities against each others in terms of possession of capital, possession of wealth, possession of raw materials, and many more things. So this middle of 19th century, this part of the world, slowly and gradually, this modern version of colonialism developed when these imperialistic forces, try to capitalize the capital formulations, try to maximize the benefit. So at the initial time, they came to this part of the world in the form of, conducting some trade or some business. But in later phases, they became the political, bosses. They became the political determiner of this part of the world. This Karl Marx So basically, he noted three kinds of colonizations. How the colonies came under. How these Western capitalist forces colonized the colonies. And in 1865, Marx noted three kinds of colonies. One is the plantation colonies, as in the West. That is one form of colonialism. Then well-populated countries like Mexico, this is different sort of colonization, and this colonial purpose like Australia. So in these three different ways, this colonial masters tries to colonize not only in the context of the South Asian context. This colonial master, not only this British colonialism, different colonial masters, for example, this Britishers, this Dutch, this Faranses, this Portuguese, this France, this Germanists, each and every jump into that particular race of colonizing this underdeveloped regions, and slowly and gradually they intervene, and in that way these patterns of colonialisms spread. By the middle of 19th century, this colonialism became integrated with what Marx called the expanded mode of capitalist productions. Through lending and investment abroad, bank and stock exchanges were the chief instruments of the strategy, and these were the points highlighted by Lenin in his elaboration of capitalist imperialism as well. So from that time onwards, this academic discourse analysis also developed, along with this spread of colonialism on the basis of their imperialistic tendencies. So in the social science, among the social scientists, this debate also developed. They try to analyze the degree of exploitation. They try to analyze how these capitalist forces can able to maximize their productions. So as a result, there are different sorts of debates developed. Serious debate in colonial imperialism had started at the beginning of 20th century with Joseph Schumpeter. For him, colonial imperialism is the imperialism of benefiting a handful of capitalists in England and not the traders or the common man. So that is one different source of understanding from Joseph Schumpeter's on the first decade of this 20th centuries. So then another one in 1917, Lenin held economic imperialism to be the highest state that have divided the entire world among the Western hegemons, and that will cost the world war as well. And he identified the monopoly as the union of industrial capital and the finance capital and export of capital to the colonies as the chief features of this stage of capitalism. So this monopoly, the very idea of colonial imperialism that has been elaborated by this Joseph Schumpeter, and this Lenin version of this monopoly capitalism, which intermixing with industrial capital and finance capital, and how they export of capital to the colonies. That has become a matter of discussions, and in that way, this debate developed in terms of this colonial imperialism. Now, I'd like to highlight, the specific meaning of this colonialism. The Encyclopedia of Humanities and Social Sciences defines colonialism as a system of control by a country over a dependent or people outside its border. European from 15th to 19th century was usually associated with economic aims. It was linked with the imperialism of the new nation state and governed by the economic policies of mercantilism. So it's a definition provided by Encyclopedia. It's basically talking about the control of the dominant country over the dependent countries, and subsequently it's automatically the marginalized side, they become a kind of colonial elements, and in that way this mercantilism also develops. Then according to the Oxford Dictionary, the word colony is derived from the Latin word for farmer, cultivator, planter, or settler in a new country, colonus. So colonia had those meanings of firm, landed estate, settlement. So from this, the very idea of modern imperialism, this colonialism is developed, and since it is developed from this modern imperialism, a particular region is considered to be imperialist in character when that particular region, when that particular forces develop the instinct of annexing other territories. When a particular dominant forces develop a genuine instinct in terms of extracting other territory, they can be considered as imperialistic forces. And from these imperialistic tendencies, later on they try to colonize others. The reason behind their instinct in terms of territory, in order to grow farming activities, cultivators, plantation activities, in that way this very idea of his colonialism developed. So it's basically talking about some etymological meanings like this farm, landed estate, settlement, etc. Marxists were of the opinion that colonies were established by the British primarily to find a market for the finished goods and to find workforce to work in their factories. The labor worked out very cheap for them. The colonized were forced to buy the goods from them, since an impression was created on them that a superior class produced them. In other words, colonies were formed to find a market for the goods produced by the colonized. These things I have already discussed in my previous lecture in imperialism in South Asia as well. Again, I'd like to highlight the reason behind, the simple logic behind this spread of colonialism in different parts of the world and also in South Asia is that of using this region, these backward regions, as their region of draining the raw materials, and by going practicing some sort of technical, with the help of technical experts, so that they can create some sort of technicians with the help of which they can manufacture different sorts of products. Again, they can able to sell in these underdeveloped regions and create a profit, because their competition, the Western society is no longer relevant. Each and every European society became more dominating in the age of industrial revolutions. So they try to expand their activities, they try to expand their business, their trade policies, because in the industrializations, the finished products, the productive commodity have to sell. And to sell the productive commodity, they want large market. And these are the regions which are populous regions. It's a large regions comprised of huge people. So they try to grab in those market. So from that particular point of as well, this they try to establish colonies. So from Marxist viewpoint as well, it can be this colonialism is considered to be a kind of it's nothing but it's a creation of it's a result of this free market. It's a result of using these regions as a the region of exporting raw materials, and it's considered to be a market so that they can sell their finished products. So that's why it is considered to be colonies. But at the same time, as against this Marxist analysis, Albert Memmi contradicts this view, and he is of the opinion that economy or material gain may not be the only objective behind colonizations. That is also true, because only not all these Britishers came this part of the world. They have this, though they have their this economic tendencies, economic policies, economic gain, economic objective, but at the same time they also have some other objectives as well. So in that way this debate arises among the critics in terms of this modern imperialism or this KRS. Again, this KRS Iyengar is of the opinion that colonialism is made possible by the fact that one race has a better mastery of the arts of war and peace than another, and hence is in a position to impose its domination over the inferior. That I have already Then again, this Nirat Chaudhuri observes the challenge before the British was to create an open society in order to order of the mind. Their opportunity was to make India an extension of the Western world, and in this process, India also extended its cooperation. G.N. Devi says that the British colonial period in India was a period both of confrontation and collaboration, and willing participation recurs with an amazing frequency all through the history of the British colonial rule in India. So these are some observations. Now moving towards this colonial imperialism in South Asia. As we have all know, by the beginning of 19th century, the Southeast, including India and Sri Lanka, that means this presently this Sri Lanka was under British control. Yet in India, this authority was technically exercised by the English East India Company as tenants of the Mughal rule. In 1857, that ruler was overthrown, and in 1858, Victoria, Queen of England, took over the territory and government of British India. About a third, the subcontinent, however, was allowed to remain nominally independent under the native princes. In 1877, Queen Victoria was proclaimed the Empress of India and princely brought under the paramountcy of the British crown. So these are some sort of narratives. But we all know about how this colonialism expanded in South and more specifically Indian subcontinent. If you're talking about in the context of Indian subcontinent after this Battle of Palas and Battle of Buxar, this East India Company, become more dominating this part of the world. But the political dominance, the absolute political supremacy of this British Parliament came to this part of the world only after this 1858 Queen's proclamations. That means in 1857, after the Sepoy mutinies, finally the British Parliament took over the SARS, and through this Queen's proclamations, and the future of India depends on the wishes of this British Parliament from this 1858 onwards. So we all know about this historical development and how this colonial masters became successful in consolidating colonialism in this part of the world. And for that you can go through different sorts of books. I do believe that you all have this soft copy of this book, namely Modern South Asia by Sugata Bose and IS Zalal. It is available in Google Scholars and everywhere. You can download it, and if you cannot, I'll also provide you. This is the soft copy of this book. So the history of this colonialism, about the history of colonialism in South Asia, if you go through this particular book of IS Zalal and Sugata Bose, you might develop a kind of idea how colonialism spread historically. This coastal salient, that means the Sri Lanka, was occupied by Dutch in 1796, the island and the inland in 1815. Between these years, Ceylon was administered as a part of the Madras in 1815. It was turned into a crown colony. While India was regarded as the jewel of the crown by the British because of India's vast and various economic resources, Ceylon was developed essentially as a plantation colony. So there are some standardizations. According to these colonial forces, they give different numerical rankings to different colonies on the basis of their availability of resources. So in that way, for British colonialism, Indian subcontinent is considered to be paramount on the basis of available resources, and that is why it's the jewel of the crown by the British. It's regarded. By large part of her territory was, however, annexed to British India in 1886. That means this Burma was annexed to the huge benefit of the empire in terms of her forest in 1902. So subsequently, by the end of this 19th centuries, the entire South Asia came under this British colonialism, and subsequently in the 20th century, as a result of this spread of colonialism, as a result of these exploitations, as a result of this exploitation of this modern imperialistic version of colonialism in South Asia from 20th century onwards, this nationalism, the forces of nationalism spread. It spread from 19th century, but it accelerated in 20th onwards. Then again, farther east, the British, the French, and the Dutch competed for territories and came to divide Southeast Asia as follows. Malaysia, including Singapore and Hong Kong for the British. There's a subdivision. They demarcated among themselves. Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong annexed by British. Indonesia for the Dutch, that means for Holland. And Indochina, including Cambodia, nowadays is considered Kampuchea. Laos and Vietnam for the French. And except for China within Vietnam, the French allowed limited political autonomy to the dynasty's rulers, but exercised full economic control over Indochina. So in that way, uh, uh, in Southeast Asia in general and in South Asia in particularly, this colonial dominance came. The different colonial masters came to this part of the world. And if we're talking in the context of South Asia, it's basically this British colonialism. This British colonialism became successful in colonizing this entire South Asian context. But in the later phases, as a result of this spread of this nationalism, as a result of spread of nationalistic forces, as a result of this nationalistic tendencies, this nationalism spread in this part of the world, and slowly and gradually, we might experience with this different sorts of movement in South Asian context, and the foremost among them we can consider this India's freedom movement. That is the finest example of this, how nationalism spread in this South Asian context. So in conclusions, I'd like to conclude my discussion by emphasizing on, though primarily colonialism has a geographical and a political connotation, both the systems are grounded in strong economic motives. Modern colonialism started in the 15th century and came to its climax in the late 19th centuries, when imperialism virtually became a creed of the developed capitalist countries of the West. Its essential purpose was to acquire the natural resources of the subject countries and to develop them as captive markets for the finished products. The resulting conflict produced these two. Two World War. So we all have been experiencing with this sort of development as a result of these economic motives, as a result of this conflict, as a result of these increasing hostilities in European countries, among the European countries. They spread their colonial activities, the imperialistic tendency in this part of the world, and in the later phases, in order to grab the dominant in this part of the world, and as a result of spread of nationalism, in different parts of Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa as well, that everything ultimately culminates in the form of this devastation that we all have been experiencing in the 20th centuries as well, in the form of World War I and World War II. So, but from 19th centuries, from 18th centuries, and more specifically from 19th centuries to the 20th centuries, these different imperialist forces, by developing their modern imperialistic tendencies, they become successful in colonizing in this part of the world, and again they extract more profit from this part of the world. But in 20th centuries, as a result of the spread of nationalism, these colonies, they got freedom slowly and gradually, and from 1950s, the scenario of the world becomes something different. And now we are residing in the 21st century, and in 21st centuries, again we have been experiencing with some other sorts of development. We have been experiencing with different sorts of trade perceptions as well. From 1950s to this 21st centuries, we have been experiencing with some sort of new version of this capitalist tendencies in the form of neo-colonialisms, this neoliberalisms. These are different new version of this capitalisms came into the forefront. And but in 2020, specifically in 21st century, in 2020, in this particular year, we have been experiencing with a tremendous threat to the entire human mankind in the form of this pandemic threat. It's a kind of health hazards to the entire humankind in the form of corona and pandemic COVID-19. So from this time onwards in 21st centuries, need of the hour to re-examine, regenerate, re-accentuate, some sort of grounding realities. And slowly and gradually, maybe after 1 or 2 years, the politics, the world politics may be diluted in some another way as well, and we may have been experiencing with some another sorts of dramas, another sorts of positive and negative development of the world politics. Maybe after 1 2 years. So days will come, days will tell many more things. So in today's class, I'd basically highlight the meaning of colonialism, how this colonialism spread in different parts of the world, why this colonialism spread in different parts of the world, how these colonial masters came to this part of the world, specifically in South Asia. But regarding the historical events, different sorts of historical events, I don't want to go in more details about all the historical events, all those years, different treaties, different activities that is going on in the last 200 years and the South Asian context. So regarding those historical narratives, you can go through this Sugata Bose and ISSLL's books, and you will get all those informations. And on the basis of those information and this particular these videos, I do believe that you can able to gather some sort of understanding about this colonialism in Southeast. So with that words, I would like to conclude my today's lecture on colonialism in South Asia. So thank you very much. Stay home and stay safe. Thank you.